That
I didn't
wasn't a
think
part
about
of the
it.
dream, really?
I didn't care.
Really?
You know, I really didn't. I didn't care.
You might think you know everything about Bernie Mac, the king of comedy from Chicago, the man who made millions roar with laughter on stage and screen. But get ready, because a truth unearthed 15 years later is about to leave you breathless. A secret archive sealed since the day he passed away has finally been opened. And inside, it's not just a few family photos or career memorabilia. It's unreleased VHS tapes haunting letters and documents exposing the dark side of showbiz he once faced. Every page, every recording in that archive holds the power to rewrite the entire story of Bernie Mac, from the smile he wore on stage to the tragedy hidden behind the curtain. So what exactly was in that archive that the family kept hidden for 15 years? Watch until the end of this video, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because the truth you're about to hear will change everything. A childhood shrouded in darkness. There's a little-known truth before becoming the king of comedy on stage. Bernie Mac was just a skinny black kid from Chicago's South Side carrying more grief than any child should have to endure. But it was those very wounds, those moments spent in front of a mirror mimicking adult laughter and gestures that sowed the seeds of a career that would go on to inspire millions. Only after his secret archive was unlocked did the world finally glimpse those early chapters of his life and understand that the laughter Bernie gave to the world was born from a childhood steeped in shadows. Bernard Jeffrey McCullough was born on October 5, 1957 in Chicago, Illinois. The name Bernie Mac would come later, but back then, little Bernard was just the second child in a working-class family. South Side was a harsh land plagued by poverty, violence, and racial discrimination that haunted every household like ghosts. At only 16 years old, Bernie lost his mother, Mary McCullough, to cancer, leaving behind a void that could never be filled. His father, Jeffrey Harrison, abandoned the family not long after. Even his older brother and his grandmother, the last remaining pillars of support, would eventually pass away. Among the items revealed in the newly opened archive was a sheet of school notebook paper scrawled with shaky handwriting, "Lost mom, lost dad, lost everything. But I can't lose the laughter." That short sentence was the silent vow of teenage Bernie. A life filled with loss and hardship forced Bernie to grow up fast. To survive, he took on any job he could find, from waiting tables to security and janitorial work. But in the few spare moments he had, he sought out laughter. From as young as 7 or 8, Bernie would stand in front of a mirror imitating movie characters, repeating lines and adding his own twists. His grandmother, a constant source of encouragement, once said that Bernie could light up the heaviest room with a single line. In an old VHS tape recently recovered from the archive, a young Bernie is seen in wrinkled clothes standing at a church pulpit using mimicry to make his friends laugh. His voice is innocent, but his eyes already shine with the determination of a born performer. The church and his local community became Bernie's first stage. There he learned to catch the rhythm, to look the crowd in the eye without fear. But Bernie's childhood wasn't all laughter. After each makeshift performance, he returned to a grim reality, a rundown apartment in the slums, a dinner table devoid of loved ones. It was this stark contrast that would later shape his comedic style, blunt, sharp-edged, but always grounded in a deeply compassionate heart. Bernie once said, "I'm not afraid of the audience. What's scarier than growing up alone?" In 1973, at just 16, Bernie officially became an orphan. That cruel turning point also became the drive pushing him to carve out his own path. Notes found in the archive reveal that he once wrote down his goal. "One day, my laughter will feed the family I no longer have." That wish would indeed come true later in life, but at the time it was just a fragile spark in a dark room. In the late 1970s, Bernie began testing his craft in small Chicago bars and comedy clubs. Early on, he was paid only a few dollars for a 10-minute set. Some nights he had to walk miles in the freezing cold because he couldn't afford bus fare. Yet every time he stood before an audience, he came alive, the pain faded, and only connection remained. In one photo found in the archive, 20-year-old Bernie stands on a stage in an oversized suit, gripping a microphone, laughing along with a few dozen spectators. A handwritten caption reads, "This was the first time I felt like I belonged somewhere." Bernie Mac didn't stop at barroom skits. He cultivated his own voice, fearless, direct, and unafraid to tackle taboo topics that many comedians avoided. One archival tape shows a young Bernie stepping on stage with the line, "I ain't scared of you," a phrase that would later become his signature on Def Comedy Jam in the 1990s. Few know, though, that the line first emerged in his unknown days, a defiant shout against a life that had been anything but fair. Perhaps it was the pain of loss that created a fearless Bernie Mac. Having faced the deaths of his mother, grandmother, and brother, he learned that true fear didn't live under stage lights, it lived in letting pain consume you. So Bernie chose to transform grief into laughter. In 1977, Bernie married Rhonda Gore, his high school sweetheart, and the woman who would stay by his side for life. Their marriage gave him a steady foundation. In 1978, their daughter Janice was born. Among the archive's treasures is a letter Bernie wrote to his wife. "I've got nothing but laughter, but I promise I'll turn it into a safe home for you and our child." That simple promise would become his lifelong motivation to chase the spotlight no matter the cost. The early years of his career were anything but easy. Bernie still took on odd jobs to make ends meet, security warehouse work, whatever he could find. But at night, he returned to the stage, meticulously rehearsing each line, perfecting every pause. People say he could spend hours refining a single punchline to make sure it hit just right and left the crowd roaring. In the archive, there are pages densely packed with handwritten notes full of crossouts and edits, proof of how much care Bernie poured into every joke. Looking back at his childhood and those early years, what emerges is a story of relentless defiance. From a boy who lost his parents and learned to make himself laugh in the mirror to a young man wandering Chicago with only a few dollars and big dreams, all of it became the foundation for the legend Bernie Mac would become. Now, 15 years later, the archive has returned that truth to the public, the real image of a boy who chose laughter as his weapon, a hungry young man who turned pain into art. And from that very darkness, a comedy star stepped into the light, ready to change the world. When Bernie Mac became unmissable, the 1990s marked an unforgettable turning point. In 1992, Bernie appeared on Def Comedy Jam, the show that launched many black comedy stars. From his very first appearance, he took the stage with a thunderous declaration, "I ain't scared of you." The crowd erupted. The room exploded with laughter. It wasn't just a message to the audience. It was a vow to life itself. He would never again let fear defeat him. From that moment, Bernie Mac became a symbol, a face audiences eagerly awaited in any show. In 2000, his career reached another peak when he joined Steve Harvey Cedric, the Entertainer, and D.L. Hewley in the original Kings of Comedy. The comedy film, directed by Spike Lee, was a box office sensation and elevated all four performers to the status of legends in American comedy. Among them, Bernie Mac stood out the most with his unflinching style tackling tough subjects like poverty, education, and street violence. He spoke of them with raw honesty and still had the audience laughing out loud. Spike Lee once admitted Bernie didn't just make people laugh, he forced them to face the truth. But Bernie didn't stop there. He entered the world of film with supporting roles that left lasting impressions. Audiences remembered him in Friday 1995 as the hilarious pastor in The Players Club 1998, and later shown in Ocean's 11 2001 and its two sequels. Surrounded by megastars like George Clooney, Brad Pitt, and Matt Damon, Bernie still held his own charming, clever, and irreplaceable. With just a few minutes of screen time, he etched himself into the viewer's memory. The true pinnacle came with The Bernie Mac Show 2001-2006. It wasn't just a sitcom, it was his autobiography brought to the small screen. A man unexpectedly raising his three nieces and nephews with humor and heart. The show didn't just win Emmy, Peabody, and Humanitas awards, it made Bernie a household name across America. Significantly, the series transformed public perception of Bernie Mac, no longer just a gritty street comic, but a family man and a cultural icon for Black America. In the early 2000s, Bernie continued to appear in successful projects. Charlie's Angels Full Throttle 2003 brought him a new wave of young fans, while Mr. 3000 2004 gave him a chance to lead in a sports comedy. Even as sarcoidosis began to severely affect his health, he kept working tirelessly. Friends recalled times when he had to film scenes while on medication to help him breathe, but he never let the audience see that fatigue. In 2007, Bernie was listed among The Hollywood Reporter's 100 Most Powerful People in Hollywood. With paychecks reaching millions of dollars per project, he had officially entered the ranks of indispensable stars. But wealth was never his end goal. In a note found in the archive, Bernie wrote, "It's not riches that made me, it's laughter that's my greatest asset." What made Bernie Mac different was his honesty. He didn't flatter the audience, didn't avoid uncomfortable topics. While many comedians opted for easy laughs, Bernie chose to dig into pain and turn it into cathartic humor. He dared to talk about family, his mother's death, the brutality of the ghetto, things you wouldn't expect to be comedic material. And yet somehow he turned all of it into part of his tear-jerking legacy of laughter. At his peak, Bernie Mac wasn't just an actor or a comedian, he was a cultural icon. He represented a generation of black entertainers who didn't give in to adversity, who rose from poverty to claim their place in Hollywood. White or black, rich or poor, everyone could find a piece of their own story in Bernie's performances. But that bright light only lasted a few more years before fate came knocking. In 2008, while his name still blazed brightly, Bernie Mac suddenly passed away due to complications from pneumonia, leaving the world in shock. It became clear then a major chapter in American comedy had ended far too soon. Yet when we look back on Bernie Mac's extraordinary career, one truth stands tall. He wasn't just a star. He redefined what laughter meant. From cramped bars to the grandest stages, from The Line, I Ain't Scared of You, to a sitcom that touched millions of hearts, Bernie Mac proved that pain could become legacy. And that's why more than 15 years later, the name Bernie Mac remains an irreplaceable part of American cultural memory. Tragedy and death. The spotlight had once burned brightly, but the shadows behind the curtain were far more unforgiving. While Bernie Mac continued to make millions laugh, few knew that inside his body, a silent battle had been waged for decades. Bernie suffered from sarcoidosis, a rare disorder that causes chronic inflammation in organs, particularly the lungs. The disease had been diagnosed in the late 1980s, but Bernie kept it hidden. He didn't want the audience to see a king struggling to survive. He wanted them to remember only the laughter. In the early 2000s, even as The Bernie Mac Show racked up awards, he was frequently hospitalized due to breathing difficulties. Friends recalled how after finishing a scene, he would lean against the wall just to catch his breath, drenched in sweat, as if he'd run a marathon. And yet moments later, he'd walk back out with a radiant smile, cracking jokes like there had never been any pain. In private letters found in the archive, Bernie wrote, "The audience doesn't pay to see me suffer. They pay to hear me make them laugh. So I'll laugh with them for as long as I possibly can." In 2008, his condition worsened. In early August, Bernie was admitted to a hospital in Chicago due to pneumonia, the most dangerous complication of sarcoidosis. He had overcome flare-ups before, but this time was different. Doctors fought to save him, family stayed close by his bedside, but Bernie's health declined rapidly. On August 9, 2008, the heart of the king of comedy stopped beating. He passed away at the age of 50, while his career was still at its peak. The news spread like wildfire, and Hollywood was stunned. Thousands gathered in Chicago for the funeral at the House of Hope, a church that could hold over 10,000 people. The atmosphere was a strange mix of mourning and joy tears, mingled with laughter, as friends and colleagues shared humorous stories of Bernie, even in their final farewell. Steve Harvey choked back emotion. "We lost a king, but Bernie's legacy of laughter will never die." Bernie's death was not just a personal loss for family and friends, it was a cultural shock. Audiences everywhere felt as if they'd lost someone close to them. Online forums and the early days of social media were flooded with messages of grief. Some even dubbed August 9, 2008 the day laughter went silent. Bernie Mac's tragedy became even more haunting as details from the archive came to light. He had written diary entries about his fear of not living long enough to see his granddaughter grow up. He admitted moments of resentment toward his failing body, but always ended with a joke. "If I go tomorrow, at least I made the world laugh." His passing raised tough questions about the price of being an entertainer. Behind the laughter, behind the sold-out shows, there were pressures, illness, and quiet sacrifice. Bernie Mac never publicly complained. He chose to keep his pain private so the audience would see only strength, so colleagues would see only professionalism, and so his family would see only a pillar of resilience. And perhaps that's why his death stung so deeply. A king was taken before his crown had even begun to tarnish, leaving a void no one has yet been able to fill. What remains from an unfinished film to the handwritten journal pages in the archive only underscores this truth: Bernie Mac wasn't just an artist. He was a symbol, a flame that burned brightly to bring joy to millions, even as it quietly flickered out in silence. The Secret Archive. What was discovered? For the past 15 years, Bernie Mac's fans could only remember him through endless laughter, iconic film roles, and the heartbreaking memory of his untimely passing at 50. But when the door to his secret archive finally opened, the world held its breath. These were no longer familiar stories, but a treasure trove of unknown fragments powerful enough to rewrite how we see this legend. The first shock came from old VHS tapes, their labels faded with time. This was Tapes from a King, a collection capturing Bernie's early stand-up performances, back when he was still an unknown young man performing at small clubs across Chicago. In these tapes, he wasn't the Hollywood star, but a young artist testing lines, sometimes stumbling, sometimes unsure. And yet those seemingly awkward moments revealed a fierce determination and burning desire to turn pain into laughter. One particularly striking clip shows him on stage in front of only a few dozen people shouting, "I ain't scared of you," the very phrase that would later become his signature, though few realized it was born in those quiet, anonymous nights in Chicago, as a defiant challenge thrown at fate itself. Next to the tapes was a stack of handwritten letters. The paper yellowed, the pen strokes shaky but full of emotion. In a letter to his wife Rhonda from 1978, Bernie wrote, "I have nothing but laughter, but I promise I'll turn it into a safe home for you and our child." Reading those words, the public began to understand that Bernie's laughter wasn't just for entertainment. It was a vow to provide for his family, a burden he carried with deep responsibility. Other letters were addressed to his daughter Janice, when she was still a child, where Bernie's tone swung between playful and heartfelt baby girl. "If you ever get tired of me mentioning you on stage, know it's only because I want the world to know how proud I am to be your dad." Those confessions revealed his inner conflict between being an artist who needed material to create and a father afraid of exposing his child to pain. Then came the medical records, perhaps the most sobering discovery. Everyone knew Bernie had sarcoidosis, but only with the archive's unveiling did the severity become clear. Diagnosis papers from 1983 documented how the disease had deeply affected his lungs, leaving his health in a constant state of fragility. Some medical files recorded hospital admissions and oxygen use immediately after performances. Janice once recalled how after leaving the stage to the sound of roaring laughter, her father would have to put on an oxygen mask backstage just to breathe. That brutal reality was now confirmed by hospital documents still bearing fresh ink stamps. Anyone who looked through them would understand every laugh Bernie gave the world came at the cost of immense pain. Beyond the tapes and letters, there were also behind-the-scenes notes Bernie had used to build his ideas. The scraps of paper were packed with writing full of strike-throughs and edits, evidence of his creative labor. One draft showed he had envisioned creating a personal show as early as the late 1980s, writing, "I'll show people my real life, an uncle, a dad, imperfect but honest." That very concept would later take shape as The Bernie Mac Show, the sitcom that cemented his legacy in the hearts of a global audience. Of particular note was a small notebook listing 10 most important things in life. The items weren't fame or money, but rather family, health, honesty, laughter, community, respect, friendship, music, faith, and peace. When this notebook was released, many fans wept. They saw that behind the tough exterior and fearless comedy style was a man who longed for peace, someone who had paid a heavy price in pursuit of it during his short life. But perhaps the most controversial discovery was a set of personal notes about the entertainment industry. In them, Bernie expressed candid thoughts about the fakeness, the pressures he faced in Hollywood. He admitted he sometimes resented the spotlight because it pulled him away from his family, made him feel like he wasn't himself anymore. When these pages were made public, they sparked debate. Had Bernie intended to reveal more about the dark side of showbiz had he lived longer? The archive 15 years later is more than a collection of keepsakes. It's a door into Bernie Mac's true soul, an orphan who turned pain into art, a husband burdened with responsibility, a father filled with both pride and guilt, and an artist battling a devastating illness while still standing strong on stage. Each artifact, every letter, every video clip is a piece of the puzzle, and together they form the most complete portrait of the man who made the world laugh, and now 15 years on still brings us to tears. When laughter becomes immortal, some flames, though extinguished in the present, leave behind a light that guides generations to come. Bernie Mac was one such flame. He left this world in 2008, but the legacy he left behind remains alive like laughter, echoing endlessly in the memories of millions. Bernie was not just a comedian, but a storyteller, a witness of his time. He transformed the harsh experiences of his childhood in Chicago into artistic material, turned pain into laughter, and raw truth into a language that connected hearts. When people revisit the original kings of comedy or The Bernie Mac Show, they're not merely watching a comedy program, they're witnessing a slice of American life in that era through the eyes of someone who dared to speak the truth and live it. The opening of his archive after 15 years only deepens that legacy. The letters, the tapes, the unfinished scripts show that Bernie wasn't just an entertainer on stage, he was a man with a sincere heart, a man bearing silent pain, and a dream of using laughter to soothe society's wounds. That very truth is what made him a legend, not because he was perfect, but because he gave everything of himself, despite every limit. Bernie Mac's legacy lives on in the generations of comedians who followed him. Kevin Hart, Cedric the Entertainer, Steve Harvey, Chris Rock all have acknowledged Bernie as a powerful source of inspiration. They learned from him the ferocity on stage, the honesty in every word, and most importantly, the courage to stand firm in the face of prejudice and illness. Bernie's laughter didn't stop at the theater walls, it coursed into the veins of those who carried on his craft. For audiences, Bernie Mac is a vessel of memory. Family evenings gathered around the TV, bursts of laughter from simple lines. These moments became part of childhood of youth. That's why even 15 years after his passing, people still speak his name as if he had performed just last night. But above all, Bernie's greatest legacy is the life philosophy he left behind. Through the letters found in his archive, through his final words on stage, he always emphasized, "Don't be afraid to live honestly. Don't be afraid to laugh at your own pain. Because only when we dare to laugh are we truly free." That message isn't just for performers, it's for anyone navigating life's chaos. Bernie Mac proved that laughter can be immortal. His body may lie beneath the earth, but his performances, his stories, and the treasures revealed from the archive will continue to be told, shared, and passed on. We may lose the person, but never the laughter he planted in the world. And that's why when the secret archive was opened, people didn't just see a Bernie Mac who had passed. They saw him come back to life through every handwritten line, every frame of footage, every wave of roaring laughter. The world may have lost a king, but Bernie Mac's throne in the hearts of the people will never fade. 15 years later, Bernie Mac's secret archive changed everything. 15 years after Bernie Mac left this world, the opening of his secret archive changed everything. It didn't just reveal untold fragments of his life, it unveiled an eternal truth behind the spotlight. And the laughter was a real human being with pain, love, and an unbreakable will to live. These revelations didn't tarnish Bernie Mac's image, they elevated him, showing a legend who laughed to hide his pain, who lived authentically to inspire the world. Bernie Mac is gone, but his legacy of laughter is immortal. Every time we watch a sketch play an episode of The Bernie Mac Show, or hear the words he once spoke, he comes alive in our hearts. And perhaps that is the kind of immortality every artist dreams of. If you believe Bernie Mac's laughter deserves to be remembered forever, leave a comment to share your thoughts and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more hidden stories and untold truths behind the curtain. Let's keep his legacy alive because, as Bernie once said, "Don't be afraid to laugh at your pain. Only when we dare to laugh are we truly free."
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.